All right, we are back. We are back to regular scheduled programming. So I had already uploaded the video of my three takeaways from uh, from the book Nice Guys and Players that was written by Ron Wills. So I want to do a follow-up video where I want to do a review from the last six chapters of the book, The Laws of Human Nature, as you guys can see right there, written by Robert Greene. Robert Greene is a beast when it comes down to these books. I feel like I'm in a way Robert Greene disciple because I've already read the 48 Laws of Power, and you guys could check on my archives on the YouTube content that I made from that book as far as the reviews from that book. I've also read the book Mastery as well. So this is the third book in my collection that I've read from Robert Greene. So I think it's maybe a couple more books that I'm thinking about maybe getting from him. So I want to do a book review from the last six chapters of that book, the last third of the book. I've already done two reviews from the first 12 chapters. All right, so I want to do a review from the last six chapters. So the first law that I want to touch on will be chapter 13, which is the law of aimlessness, which means to advance with a sense of purpose. So in this particular chapter, it talks about the story of Martin Luther King Jr. I know it is February. This is Black History Month. Martin Luther King Jr. Everybody knows was a pivotal figure for the civil rights movement, and so it talks about how him growing up in a pretty comfortable middle class background. His father was a minister, and so naturally, his father had envisioned that Martin Luther King Jr. will be following in the same footsteps, and so it seemed to be that way from the beginning as he continues to grow and mature. But Martin, one thing he talks about there in the chapter is that he even noticed that there was some personality differences between him and his father. His father was more stern, more strict, more by the book, and was introspective. However, Martin's Luther King Jr.'s personality was there were many layers to his personality. Yes, he has that introspective side, he has that serious side, but he also has a fun side. He also has a people person side. He was described as a ladies' man that liked to dance with young girls. So as he's kind of coming into his own, naturally he starts to feel a calling to do more than just be a minister and be a husband and a father to a family. And so that's when he started to pursue the whole civil rights movement thing. And when he was getting his calling, he knew that it came with a lot of backlash. He knew that it would come with bodily harm, him being physically harmed. He knew that it would come with possibly going to jail. And at a certain point, he even knew that this would may end up taking his own life. But he felt so compelled to fulfill that calling that it didn't matter what kind of anxiety, depression that he suffered, and the contemplating on whether he wanted to choose to go that direction, he ended up going that direction nevertheless. And as you guys already know, that ended up costing him his life. But that chapter, what it touched on is that path of you being on your purpose is more fulfilling and is more rewarding. But guess what? It is a road less traveled. I remember somewhere in that chapter where it talks about how and people connecting with their purpose. It starts off by thinking about the things that you were drawn to as a kid, those natural instincts, those natural primal things that drew your attention as a kid. And so as an adult, we tend to lose that because we like to be put in a certain box. But the more in tune you are as far as those interests and those desires and those hobbies you have as a kid, the more closer you are to actually fulfilling your life's purpose. So that's what chapter 13 touched on as far as the law of aimlessness and living up to your purpose and ultimately up to your highest potential. The next chapter that I found interesting was the chapter called the law of aggression, right? Seeing the hostility behind a friendly facade. And so in this chapter, it touched on the story of John D. Rockefeller. Any of you guys that done took what it be U.S. history or U.S. government, anything like that, I'm sure you're pretty familiar with John D. Rockefeller. He was the oil tycoon back in the day. And so what that first few pages, it talked about how he was able to go from a poor kid that come from a impoverished family to a rich oil tycoon. And along the way, he was able to dominate any and every situation that he came across. And what would throw people off was that if you actually took a look at him, you would think he is meek, mild, and docile, but he was able to be strategically aggressive into towards reaching his goal. So the chapter, it talks about two types of aggression. You got primitive aggression, and then you have sophisticated aggression. I want y'all to stay with me. The primitive aggression usually is the type of aggression you get from hotheads. The moment that somebody's triggering, that there's anger, they're ready to go and go upside somebody's head busters. That's primitive aggression. Sophisticated aggression is more strategic. It's more calculated. You guys see the difference there? So there are certain ways that you can use that type of aggression. Now, he also had talked about the controlled aggression, and he was listing those qualities that is good to tap into, especially when it comes down to reaching your goals in life. Being fearless. Even though you're scared to try stuff, you go there, you dip your toe in the water, and you try it anyway. Getting past your fear, being very ambitious, having high goals, striving to reach those goals, being persistent, no matter how many blocks, no matter how many roadblocks that you encounter, no matter how many brick walls that you encounter along the way, you find some way to get over it, go around it, or go through those things in order to get closer to your goal. And then anger. I know that's a word that people tends to think negatively, but you can harness your anger and use that to help achieve goals. Because that anger gives you more energy. And with that energy, you're able to be more 10 toes down what you're trying to, it's business that you have to take care of. So that was an interesting chapter to this, chapter 16, the law of aggression. Now, the very last chapter of the book was chapter 18, and that talks about the law of death denial. The law of death denial. And so what I find interesting in that chapter is that a lot of the stuff that was brought up in that chapter, you can actually reference it back to scriptures in the Bible. Because Robert Greene, he talks about how we as humans avoid death like it's evil, even though we know that it's eventually going to happen to each and every last one of us, each and every last one of living creature or thing on this earth. So in hindsight, we don't prepare for it like we should. And it often catches us by surprise. It in that chapter talks about the story of Mary Flannery O'Connor. And I never even heard of this woman prior to me, but she was like a renowned author, a well-known author. And so the story talks about how growing up as a little girl, she was very connected to her father. They had the same personality traits, the same quirks or whatever. She identified more with her father than she did her mother. And it got to the point where she would be very in tune with what her father was feeling. So as she got a little older, her father ends up getting sick and ends up dying from lupus. And lupus was something that was considered deadly back in those times. You were going to die pretty quickly if you were diagnosed with lupus. And so when her father died, she felt as though a piece of her had died with her. But her father had always said that you are a very gifted writer. You're going to be a writer one day. So she ends up following along on that path, being a gifted writer, being able to really dive in and be creative and dive into her characters, dive into the emotions and the way that they're feeling, and make these amazing stories. And so as time goes by, she ends up starting to get sick. And lo and behold, she ends up getting the same ailment or disease, which is lupus, that her father got. So knowing that her time on earth was running out, what she did was, instead of moping, feeling sorry for herself, and avoiding it, she was able to look death head on, and at the same time was able to live her life and live every day like it was her best, like it was her last day. She would gain any type of inspiration, whether it be from friends, whether it be people that she met in public, whether it be the nurses in the hospital. She would use all these people and gain her inspiration into making these characters. And what she also did was that she would be somebody that would give life advice. People will write her letters, send her letters all the time, and she would take the time out of her day, out of her schedule, to respond to those people and give them advice and give them some encouraging words. And so she was able to live her last days with no regrets. And so at the end of the chapter, it talks about some healthy ways that we can deal with death, because we know that death is inevitable and we don't know when it's going to come about. So instead of concentrating on all those silly things, those frivolous things that occupy our minds all the time, we need to start living with a sense of purpose and a sense of urgency, and start doing things in life that really matters. And scripture talks about how your life is like a vapor in the New Testament. And that is true as day, because in the grand scheme of things, when it comes down to eternity, your life is only about like that. It's almost like a drop in the ocean. You could be here today and go on tomorrow. So why put off what you can do for tomorrow? Put off for tomorrow what you can take care of today. Also in the book of Ecclesiastes, in the first couple chapters, where it talks about how Solomon would talk about how everything in life is meaningless. Everything in life is meaningless. That job that you work, that money that you're accumulating, those people that you think are important, all those pursuits that you're striving for to achieve and that you're after, all of that toil and stuff is meaningless, because at the end of the day, we all going to be 6 feet underneath. So it always allows us to be able to put things in perspective on the things that are really important, and then from there we're able to live a life that's actually worth living. So those are the three chapters that really stuck out to me. It was chapter 18, the law of death denial, chapter 13, where it talks about the law of aimlessness, and then chapter 16, where it talks about the law of aggression. So if you guys haven't already read this book, I would highly recommend that you get this book, because it has a lot of insight on how to deal with people just in everyday life in general. And it also would allow you to be able to look inside yourself and see, okay, what are some things that you struggle with? What are some things that you can improve on? And then those areas that you're pretty keen and pretty sharp on, that you can continue to sharpen yourself in those areas. So it allows you to do some self-reflection as well. So that's my video. I hope y'all enjoy it. And I will talk to y'all later. Peace.